Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Lit Lounge. It's me, Ragna. Today, we are picking up right where we left off with Batter My Heart. In the last video, we broke down the first four lines, and I hope that made sense and felt clear. Now, let's dive into the next few lines and unpack them together, line by line. Ready? Let's go. So, before that, in the first four lines, the speaker asked God to violently transform him because gentle methods had failed. Now, let us proceed to the next quatrain, where Donne shifts his imagery from the battlefield to the political realm. In lines 5 to 8, Donne explains why he needs such drastic help. He presents himself as a city that rightfully belongs to God but has been captured by an enemy. Although he wants to let God enter, he cannot do so by his own efforts because his reason, the power that should guide and protect him, has become weak and imprisoned. These lines explore the conflict between God, sin, and human reason. Let us read the lines together. I, like an usurped town to another due, labor to admit you, but oh, to no end. Reason, your viceroy in me should defend, but is captived and proves weak or untrue. Now let us unpack this carefully, line by line. I, like an usurped town to another due. So we begin with the speaker comparing himself, his soul, his inner self to an usurped town. Now, let us be clear about our terms. To usurp means to seize or take control of something by force without legal right. Think of a usurper king who illegally seizes the throne. So, a usurped town is a city that has been violently conquered and is now occupied by an illegitimate ruler. It is not under its rightful authority. The phrase to another due means rightfully belonging to another. This another is, of course, God. So, Donne is saying, my soul is like a city that has been conquered by an enemy, which is sin or the devil. But it rightfully belongs to God. I am occupied territory. Now, the allusion here is deeply biblical. In the Old Testament, we see numerous instances of cities being conquered and their inhabitants taken captive. Think of Jerusalem being overthrown by the Babylonians. Dunn is drawing on this rich tradition of siege and captivity to describe his spiritual state. He is, in essence, a city under enemy occupation, and God is the rightful king who must reclaim his property. What is fascinating here is the shift in roles. In the first line, Dunn asks God to batter him like a fortress. Now he reveals that he already is a conquered city, but conquered by the wrong power. He is pleading with God to launch a counter assault to take back what is rightfully his. Now, the sixth line, labor to admit you, but oh, to no end. The speaker says, I try very hard to let you enter my soul, but all my efforts fail. Here we can see that he's telling that my soul belongs to God, but it is under the control of sin. Here Dunn reveals his own internal struggle. He says, labor to admit you. To labor means to work hard, to strive, to exert great effort. He's not passive in his spiritual battle. He's actively trying to open the gates of his soul to God. He wants to admit God, to let him in, to surrender to his rightful rule. But then comes the devastating qualification. But oh, to no end. This is a cry of utter frustration and futility. He works and strives and struggles, but it is all useless. The no end means no result or to no purpose. Despite his best efforts, he cannot accomplish this surrender on his own. He will or his will is too weak, his habits too entrenched, his sin is too powerful. Now notice the exclamation here. But oh, this is a moment of genuine emotional outburst in the middle of a tightly structured poem. It breaks the formal rhythm and gives us a glimpse of Donne's raw anguish. He is not a detached philosopher contemplating his condition. He is a man in profound spiritual distress, crying out in helplessness. The speaker genuinely wants to enter his heart. However, he struggles, he tries, he makes efforts, yet nothing happens. His soul remains trapped. This line shows the speaker's helplessness. He is not rejecting God. Instead, he is saying, I want God, but I am too weak to free myself. This reflects an important Christian idea. Human beings often need God's grace because their own efforts are insufficient. So, here we can see the use of the poetic device irony. The speaker wants God to enter, yet cannot make it happen. The very thing he desires remains impossible. Moving on to the seventh line. Reason, your viceroy in me should defend. Here, the speaker says, reason, which is God's representative inside me, should protect me. Now, Donne introduces a crucial figure in this internal drama, reason. For Donne and for the Renaissance thinkers who influenced him, reason was the highest faculty of the human soul. It was the part of us that can discern truth, distinguish right from wrong, and govern our passions and desires. He calls reason your viceroy in me. Now, we all know that a viceroy is a governor who rules a province or colony on behalf of a monarch. The viceroy is the king's representative, wielding the king's authority in his absence. So, Donne is saying, God, you appointed reason as your representative within my soul. It is your deputy, your governor, placed here to rule me on your behalf. He then says, me should defend. This is the proper function of reason. It should defend him, protect him from the assaults of sin, guard his soul against the usurper, and keep him loyal to God. Reason is supposed to be the fortress commander who holds the city for the rightful king. The personification here is significant. Donne is treating reason not as an abstract concept but as a character in this spiritual drama, a governor who has a specific duty to perform. And as we shall see in the next line, this governor has failed catastrophically. So, according to Christian and Renaissance thought, reason was considered a gift from God. Reason helps people understand truth, resist temptation, choose good over evil. Therefore, reason should protect the speaker from sin. Now, moving on to line 8, but is captive and proves weak or untrue. Here the speaker says, but reason has been captured and has become weak or disloyal. And here we have the tragic failure. Donne says, but is captived, which means reason, the viceroy of God, has itself been taken captive. It has been captured by the same enemy that has usurped the city. The governor has been imprisoned, bound, and rendered powerless. The very faculty that should defend the soul has become a prisoner of war. Then he gives us a devastating diagnosis and proves weak or untrue, which means reason has failed in one of two ways, or perhaps both. Which are the two ways? Weak or untrue. Weak means it is impotent, it lacks the strength, the power to resist the enemy. It wants to do the right thing, but it is simply too feeble to prevail against the force of sin and temptation. This is the tragedy of human frailty. Next, we have the other option, that is untrue. This is more serious. It means disloyal, treacherous, or unfaithful. It suggests that reason has not merely been overpowered, but has actively collaborated with the enemy. It has betrayed its divine master and switched sides. Now, think about what Dunn is confessing here. He is saying that his own rational faculty, the very thing that makes him human, the thing that should guide him to God, has either been rendered helpless or has turned traitor. This is a profound statement about the limitations of human reason. We cannot think our way to salvation. Our best efforts, our highest faculties are themselves corrupted and enslaved. Okay, so in these lines, the speaker compares himself to a city that rightfully belongs to God but has been seized by an enemy. Although he struggles to welcome God into his soul, he cannot succeed. His reason, which should act as God's representative and protect him from sin, has been captured and weakened. Therefore, he feels powerless and needs God's direct intervention to rescue and transform him. So, in the first 8 lines, the speaker compared himself to a city captured by an enemy. He felt powerless and asked God to rescue him. Now we arrive at the concluding sestet of this extraordinary sonnet. Donne has already established his desperate need for divine violence and diagnosed his spiritual paralysis. Now, in the final 6 lines, Donne changes from military imagery to marriage imagery. The speaker imagines himself as a person who loves God but is already engaged to God's enemy. Therefore, he asks God to break that relationship and unite him completely with himself. These lines contain some of the most powerful paradoxes in English poetry. Let us read the entire sestet together and then we shall unpack it line by line. Yet dearly I love you, and would be loved fain, but am betrothed unto your enemy. Divorce me, untie or break that knot again. Take me to you, imprison me, for I, except you enthrall me, never shall be free, nor ever chaste, except you ravish me. Now let us proceed carefully through these final breathtaking lines. Ninth line, yet dearly I love you and would be loved fain. The speaker says, even though I am trapped by sin, I truly love you, God, and I desperately want you to love me. We begin with the word yet. This is a crucial conjunction. It signals a contrast. Despite everything he has just confessed, his captivity, his weakness, his treachery, there remains something genuine and powerful within him. He says, yet dearly I love you. This is a sincere confession of affection. He is not indifferent to God, he is not hostile. There is genuine love in his heart. Then he adds, and would be loved fain. Now, fain is an archaic word that means gladly or eagerly. So he is saying, I love you dearly and I would gladly be loved by you in return. He desires God's love. He longs for a reciprocal relationship with the divine. This is the desire of every sincere believer to know and be known by God, to love and be loved. But notice the tension already building. If he loves God and wants to be loved by God, why is he still in his desperate state? Why does he need God to batter him and overthrow him? The answer lies in the next line. The word yet is very important. The speaker has just admitted his soul is occupied, his reason is weak, he cannot save himself. But despite all these problems, he still loves God. He longs for a close relationship with God. Now, moving on to the 10th line, but I'm betrothed unto your enemy. The speaker says, but I'm already engaged to your enemy. And here is the devastating confession. But I am betrothed unto your enemy. To be betrothed means to be engaged or pledged to be married. It is a binding promise, a solemn commitment. And Donne says he is betrothed, engaged, committed to God's enemy. Now, who's this enemy? In the Christian tradition, this is Satan, the devil, the adversary of God. But more broadly, it represents sin, the world, and the flesh, everything that stands in opposition to God. Dunn is confessing a profound spiritual adultery. He is pledged to the wrong partner. There is a marriage contract, a sacred bond that exists between him and sin. Think about the gravity of this. He is not just occasionally sinning, he is in a committed relationship with sin. He is bound to do it, he is pledged to it, he is married to it in a spiritual sense. This is why his efforts to admit God have failed. He is already betrothed to another. He cannot simply walk away from this commitment on his own. He requires a divine intervention. The allusion here is to the biblical metaphor of God as the bridegroom and the soul as the bride. Throughout scripture, particularly in the Old Testament prophets, Israel is described as an unfaithful bride who has committed adultery against God. Donne is placing himself in that tradition. He is the unfaithful spouse who needs to be reclaimed. So here we can see the use of marriage metaphor. The soul is compared to a bride engaged to the wrong person. And the enemy symbolizes sin and spiritual corruption. Now, the 11th line, divorce me, untie or break that knot again. The speaker says, separate me from your enemy, untie or break this sinful relationship. Here we have the desperate plea that follows from his confession. He says, divorce me. This is a powerful and shocking request. Divorce in Donne's time was not as common as it is today. It was a serious, often scandalous legal proceeding. But Dunn is saying, God, I need a spiritual divorce. I need you to legally and permanently sever my bond with sin. I cannot do it myself. Then he amplifies the request, untie or break that knot again. He uses two verbs to describe the dissolution of this bond, to untie and to break. To untie suggests a careful, deliberate unloosening, like undoing a knot that was carefully tied. And to break suggests a more forceful action, snapping the rope, severing the connection. So Dunn is saying, God, however you choose to do it, gently or violently, just end this relationship. Set me free from this engagement to your enemy. The word again is significant here. It suggests that this knot was tied at some point in the past. Perhaps it refers to the fall of humanity when sin entered the world, or perhaps it refers to Dunn's own personal history of sin and rebellion. Whatever the case, the knot was tied and now it must be undone. The poetic device here is the use of legal and marital imagery. Donne is drawing on the language of contracts, marriages, and divorces to describe his spiritual condition. This is a hallmark of metaphysical poetry, taking everyday concrete institutions and using them to explore abstract spiritual truths. Okay, the poetic devices and yes, the poetic devices used here in this line, the symbolism, the knot symbolizes spiritual bondage. And we can also see the use of imperative verbs like divorce, untie, break. The speaker commands or urgently pleads with God. And the divorce, untie, break, these are the three consecutive actions. And this emphasizes desperation. Okay. Now, the 12th line, take me to you, imprison me, for I. Here, the speaker says, take me completely into your possession and imprison me. Why is this strange? Normally, people want freedom, not imprisonment. But The speaker believes that his own freedom has led him into sin. Therefore, he asks God to control him completely. The speaker is saying, my own will has failed. Let your will take control. Now we come to the second half of Donne's paradoxical plea. He says, take me to you. This is the positive counterpart to the divorce he just requested. He wants to be taken, claimed, possessed by God. He wants to be brought into God's presence and under God's authority. But then he says something startling: imprison me. This is a shocking request. Why would anyone ask to be imprisoned? But Dunn is using this word in a specific paradoxical sense. He means lock me up in your love, confine me to your will, restrict my freedom to wander, take away my ability to choose sin. Think of it this way. If you are a prisoner in a dungeon, you are not free to roam and get into trouble. You are confined, restricted, limited. Done is saying, God, I am so prone to wandering, so prone to sin, that the only way to keep me safe is to lock me up in you. My freedom to sin is actually slavery. Your imprisonment is my true safety. He ends the line with, for I, which sets up the concluding paradox of the sonnet. He's about to give the reason why this imprisonment is necessary, and it is a reason that completely overturns our ordinary understanding of freedom and purity. So, moving on to the 13th line, except you enthrall me, never shall be free. Okay, the speaker says, unless you make me your prisoner, I can never become truly free. And here we have one of the most brilliant paradoxes in all of English poetry. Donne says, except you enthrall me, never shall be free. To enthrall here as a double meaning. And Donne is using both. On one hand, it means to enslave, to capture, to hold in bondage. On the other hand, it means to captivate, to enchant, to hold spellbound. So Donne is saying, unless you enslave me, I will never be truly free. Now, think about the paradox. Our ordinary understanding of freedom is the absence of restraint. We think we are free when no one is telling us what to do. But Dunn is arguing the exact opposite. He is saying that true freedom consists not in being left alone, but in being captured by God. The theological point here is profound. Dunn is expressing the Christian doctrine that sin is the real slavery. When we are left to our own devices, we become slaves to our passions, our pride, our selfish desires. We think we are free, but we are actually in chains. True freedom comes when we are captured by God's grace and brought into submission to His will. This is why He needs God to batter Him, overthrow Him, divorce Him, and imprison Him. All of these violent actions are actually acts of liberation. They break the chains of sin and set him free to become what God intended him to be. So, this is one of the most famous paradoxes in English literature or English poetry. The speaker says, I can only become free if God enslaves me. At first, this sounds impossible, but done means sin enslaves him, God's control liberates him. The spiritual meaning here is freedom from God has led to slavery to sin. Therefore, captivity to God is equal to true freedom, and captivity to sin means true slavery. Moving on to the final line, nor ever chaste except you ravish me. The speaker says, I can never become spiritually pure unless you completely possess me. And now we arrive at the most shocking, audacious, and controversial line of the entire sonnet. Donne says, nor ever chaste except you ravish me. To be chaste means to be pure, sexually virtuous, and faithful. It is the opposite of the spiritual adultery he has been confessing. He wants to be chaste, faithful to God, pure in his devotion. But the means by which he will achieve this chastity is shocking. Except you ravish me. To ravish means to rape, to violate, to carry off by force. It is a word of extreme violence and sexual violation. Donne is saying, I will never be pure and faithful unless you violently overpower me, unless you commit spiritual rape upon my soul. Now, we must be very careful here. Dan is not advocating physical sexual violence. He is using the language of sexual conquest as a metaphor for spiritual grace. He is drawing on the biblical tradition of the soul as the bride of Christ, but he turns that tradition on its head. Instead of a gentle wooing and courtship, he demands a violent consummation. The paradox is absolutely breathtaking. He is saying that purity requires violation, chastity requires ravishment, and faithfulness requires force. And this brings us back to the very first word of the sonnet. What is that word? Batter. The entire poem has been building to this shocking conclusion. The only way he can be made pure is if God takes him by force. Now we must understand this in the context of Donne's ideology or Donne's theology. He believed in the absolute sovereignty of God's grace. He believed that human beings are so corrupted by sin that they cannot choose God on their own. They must be captured, overwhelmed, seized by grace. So, Donne is expressing that doctrine in the most vivid, shocking, and memorable language. And the poetic devices here are numerous. Paradox was used here. He uses two breathtaking paradoxes: freedom through enslavement, purity through violation. And here we can also find the antithesis. He sets up strong contrasts between freedom and enslavement, chastity and ravishment. And there is also this shocking imagery. The use of ravish is deliberately provocative. It is meant to jolt the reader and force us to think deeply about the nature of grace. And also, we can find the use of sound devices, the alliteration of the r sound in ravish and never. So, these sounds create a rolling rhythmic intensity. And we should also note the syntactic structure. The final two lines are carefully balanced. Except you enthralled me, never shall be free, nor ever chaste except you ravish me. So the parallelism is striking. It gives the conclusion a sense of inevitability of poetic closure. The paradoxes are so perfectly balanced that they feel like absolute truth. So, in the final sestet of the poem, the speaker declares his love for God but admits that he is spiritually engaged to God's enemy. He asks God to break the sinful bond and take complete possession of him. Through a series of powerful paradoxes, Donne argues that true freedom comes only through surrender to God, and that true purity is possible only when God completely transforms the soul. And so we have reached the end of this extraordinary poem. Let us step back and consider what Donne has accomplished in these 14 lines. He has presented us with a vision of grace that is violent, shocking, and utterly dependent on God's unilateral action. And he has confessed his love for God, but also his bondage to sin. He has asked for divorce and imprisonment, for ravishment and enslavement, and in doing so, he has overturned all of our ordinary assumptions about freedom and purity, about love and force, about human effort and divine grace. The central argument of the sonnet can be stated simply like human beings cannot save themselves. Our will is weak, our reason is captive, our efforts are futile, and salvation requires a divine assault, a battering, an overthrow, a ravishment, and that assault is actually the greatest act of love. Donne is telling God, in effect, if you leave me alone, I will be lost. If you treat me gently, I will resist. The only way to save me is to break me. The only way to make me free is to enslave me. The only way to make me pure is to violate me. This is the paradox of grace, and Donne has expressed it with more power, more passion, and more poetic brilliance than perhaps anyone else in the English language. So, that's a wrap on today's deep dive into Batter My Heart 3% God. I hope this line by line discussion helped you understand the poem more clearly and appreciate the depth of John Donne's ideas. And if you like more classes like this, whether it's detailed explanations of poems, novels, drama, criticism, autobiographies, literary backgrounds, or exam oriented notes, just drop your requests in the comments below. Your suggestions help decide what we'll cover next. As far as we know, the collegiate exam is descriptive in nature, which means we need a thorough understanding of every literary work, whether it's poetry, fiction, novels, drama, criticism, or literary theory. That's why we'll be focusing carefully on each text, line by line, and concept by concept. If this video made the poem easier for you, please take a moment to like, subscribe, and share this with your friends. Join our growing literature family here at Lit Lounge. Thank you for watching. Keep reading, keep learning, and I'll see you in the next class. Until then, let's keep exploring literature together. Thank you.